Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Dunford, to you and your family. General Dunford, with the President's recent announcement about 500 more advisors going into the anti-ISIL mission in Iraq and Syria and in the region, we're now up to 3,500 troops that are serving abroad in that battle, serving as advisors, as trainers, special forces, coordinating air campaigns, conducting ground strikes. The war passed its 11th month anniversary yesterday. 2 days ago, General Dempsey was here and testified that he believed in a mission of this complexity, it was likely to be a multi-year effort that would require a sustained commitment by the United States to defeat ISIL. Do you think it would be received positively by the troops who we are asking to deploy far from home and risk their lives if Congress were to have a debate and authorize and affirm the U.S. mission against ISIL?
Senator, I do think it'd be positive from a couple of perspectives. One, the reason you mentioned is, you know, what I think our young men and women need, and it's really all they need to do what we ask them to do, is a sense that what they're doing has purpose, has meaning, and has the support of the American people. So that's the first reason. But I also think that there's a second benefit from such a debate, and that is to send a clear and unmistakable message to our adversaries and to our allies that we're committed to this endeavor.
Thank you, General. With respect to the anti-ISIL effort, I want to pick up on something Senator Reid was talking about earlier. The whole-of-government approach that, as you referred it, has sort of 9 lines of effort. And just for the record, I think we know these, but for everybody there, supporting effective governance in Iraq, denying ISIL safe haven, building partner capacity, enhancing intelligence collection on ISIL, disrupting ISIL finances, exposing ISIL's true nature, disrupting the flow of foreign fighters, protecting the homeland, and humanitarian support. Those 9 lines, 2 are purely DOD, denying ISIL safe haven and building partner capacity. The DOD has a piece of some of the others, but the others are generally non-DOD. You've testified that you think the effect of sequester on the DOD mission could be catastrophic. But given the fact that 7 of these line items are non-DOD, would you agree that the allowance of sequester cuts to come back full force October 1 would also significantly hurt the other 7 lines of effort, which are critical to defeating ISIL?
Senator, I do, and if you just don't mind, I'd just like to talk about the relationship between the 2 lines of effort and the
Please.
DOD and the other 7, because I think it highlights the issue. From my perspective, the 2 lines of effort that we have right now, one, deny sanctuary and build partnership capacity in both Iraq and Syria, really are buying time and space for those other 7 lines of effort to work. And to be quite honest, you know, I don't see how we can have an enduring success unless those other 7 lines of effort are addressed, and they are, in the final analysis, more important. I think the military lines of effort will set the conditions for those other 7 lines of effort to be put into effect. But I certainly can't see us being successful without all of them being properly resourced. When you talk about threat finance, when you talk about moving foreign fighters, and as importantly, when you talk about the State Department's efforts to negotiate, to develop effective governance in both Iraq and Afghanistan, in both Iraq and Syria, those are going to be very important actions to be taken for us, again, to have enduring stability in the region so we can actually deal with this issue once and for all.
I think there has been some suggestion that if we fix sequester for defense, that's all that we need to do. But even for important defense priorities like defeating ISIL, the testimony you've just given about the connection between non-defense investments and defense investments in defeating ISIL is really important. And I'll just note, by my count, 95 of 100 senators are now on record, either by voting in the budget or voting in the NDAA or in their public statements, for supporting the notion that sequester should be fixed both for defense and non-defense accounts, and it's my hope that we will do that. With respect to training and equipping opposition in the anti-ISIL battle, just 2 items. Senator McCain first raised in September in a hearing, I think it was in this room, the question of if we train folks to fight ISIL in Syria and they get attacked by the Assad regime, will we protect them? And he still hasn't gotten an answer to it. He asked it again yesterday. So by my count, September to now, that's 9 months without a clear answer. We were told in theater last week that the current rules of engagement still would prohibit U.S. effort to support U.S.-trained anti-ISIL fighters in Syria if they come under attack by the Assad regime. I've asked questions for the record to get that clarified, and I would like to know if that is in fact the policy, if DOD intends to change the policy, when they will change the policy, and if not, what do we need to do to change the policy? Because I do not believe we should be sending U.S.-trained folks into a theater of war without giving them a guarantee that they will be protected. Those questions will be record questions from the hearing 2 days ago, but I just want to let you know that those are coming, and we view that as a very important matter.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General and Ms. Dunford, I want to thank you for your service to the country, taking on this new responsibility. I certainly know that Marines all over the country, whether on active duty or retired, take great pride in the fact that you're only the second Marine ever nominated for this post. And I know your career has exemplified the values of honor, courage, and commitment that are the values of the Marine Corps. And I certainly plan on voting for you with enthusiasm and encourage my colleagues to do so as well. And look forward to seeing you tomorrow night at the parade. I wanted to ask a few questions about the military and relationship with the Congress, even though your role is going to be principal advisor to the President. First in the area of force posture, this committee occasionally weighs in through the NDAA and other means on key force posture issues, number of ships, basing of troops, aircraft like the A-10. When this happens, how important is it that the military follow the defense guidance of the Senate or the Congress?
Senator, I think it's very important, given how explicit it is in the Constitution, what the responsibilities of the Congress are in that regard.
So let me provide a couple examples. So let's say there was an amendment from the chairman, and it was about the number of aircraft carriers, passed unanimously through the committee, votes on the Senate floor. You think the CNO should say, well, the chairman doesn't know that much about the Navy anymore. We're going to blow that advice in the NDAA off. Is that an appropriate role for the military?
If Congress passes a law, Senator, it wouldn't be appropriate to ignore it.
So how about an NDAA amendment that says it's the sense of Congress to, in support of the President's rebalance in the Asia-Pacific strategy, to increase forces in the PACOM AOR? Is it appropriate to ignore that or even significantly decrease forces? What do you think
Senator,
our response to that should be if that's happening?
Senator, first, obviously, the sense of Congress ought to inform all the actions that
There is a
takes.
recent amendment that says exactly that.
Right.
Let me provide a second area, and that we've talked about a little bit in terms of emerging threats. Sometimes the Department of Defense, civilian and military officials, because there's so many threats out there, miss certain threats. And let me provide an example of one that everybody seems to be focused on, with the exception of the Department of Defense. You may have seen Newsweek this week had a cover story on the Arctic and what they called, in the race to control the Arctic, the U.S. lags behind. It's a very long article, talks about how this is the world's newest great game, Kipling's term for the struggle between major powers to dominate the Earth's remote but very strategic places. Talks about how the Russians are very, very aggressively moving military forces into the Arctic, serious military exercises, and how, whether it's the Coast Guard or the Secretary of Defense, saying this new kind of geopolitical Cold War the U.S. is in danger of losing. We're not even in the same league as the Russians. We're not even playing this game at all. And so I think it's safe to say the Department of Defense has been asleep at the switch on this. Congress has been more attuned to this issue. In this year's NDAA, there's a section that requires the Department of Defense to provide Congress with a military strategy, given the new threat levels, and an O plan for the Arctic based on the increased interest and threats. Does it make sense to cut any of America's limited number of cold weather-trained warriors in the Arctic before this congressionally mandated strategy is completed?
Senator, I guess I'm not sure which forces you're alluding to be cut.
Well, there's only certain forces in the Arctic right now. They're all in Alaska.
Senator, I'd like to take that for the record.
Okay.
I'm not aware of the full range of decisions that are being made right now and what the implications are.
So, General, I think it's important to recognize, it's hard to figure out appropriate force levels and capabilities in the Arctic without having a plan. And we've mandated the desire and need for a plan, and I think we're getting a little bit of the cart before the horse, cutting forces before we even know what our plan is. But we certainly recognize that there's an increased threat, and Congress has, and we hope the DOD will recognize that as well.
Senator, if confirmed, I know I've had some conversations with both the current Chief of Naval Operations and the Commandant of the Coast Guard about the implications for the Arctic, and the commitment I'd make to you is that we will, in fact, develop an appropriate role for the military in support of our economic and political interests in the Arctic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General Dunford and Mrs. Dunford and your family for your service. I just wanted to pick up very briefly on the issue of sexual trauma in the military and the concerns about retaliation. And I think that you had noted that you would determine the root causes and continue to work to ensure that the culture does not support the retaliation. And I would ask you to have a sense of urgency as you respond to this committee on how you're going to address and resolve the issue of retaliation, because even as we downsize our military, it's even more important that our troops' morale remains strong and that there is cohesion, and there could not be strong morale or cohesion if some of your troops are encountering sexual assault and harassment and retaliation. Just wanted to make that point. Could you share very briefly your views on the rebalance to the Asia-Pacific?
Senator, I can, and it's absolutely critical that we do that, given both the demographics in Asia, but also our economic future. So there's no question about it. That's going to require us to modernize our alliances, and I think you've seen some progress in that regard. Our relationship with South Korea, our relationship with Japan, our relationship with the Philippines, Vietnam, India, Australia have all been adjusted here in recent months. I think we have an unprecedented level of exercises and engagement right now in the Pacific, again, to assert our influence and to provide a stabilizing presence. The most important thing, I think the Rebalance Pacific does, is it provides a security infrastructure within which we could advance our national interest. That's what's existed for the past 70 years, and I think the Rebalance of the Pacific, as we know it today, is designed to modernize that security infrastructure and make sure it's in place so that just as we protected our national interests over the past 70 years, we can do that in the indefinite future as well.
I just got information on the cuts that will happen to PACOM as a result of the budget necessities. And I'm glad to know that General Ordino did say that the cuts were with regard to the importance of rebalance, and therefore we want to make sure, and this is something that I know that Senator Sullivan shares with me, that the rebalance to the Asia-Pacific remains a very strong commitment on our part. You mentioned that Russia is the greatest threat to our national security. Where would ISIL, China, and North Korea fall with regard to our national security dangers?
Senator, if I had to rack and stack them today, I had Russia down as number one. I'd have China down as number two.
And could you explain why briefly?
Sure. Russia, of course, because of
Yes.
nuclear capability and their aggression. China, because of their military capability, their growing military capability and their presence in the Pacific and our interests in the Pacific. So it's a relationship between their capabilities and our interests. It doesn't necessarily mean they're a current threat. It doesn't mean we view China as an enemy. But again, as someone in uniform, I get paid to look at both somebody's intent and their capabilities. So when I look at Chinese capabilities relative to our interests in the Pacific, I'd have to consider China as an area of concern for security, again, as distinct from a threat. Clearly, North Korea with ballistic missile capability and the potential to reach the United States and attack the homeland is high on that list, and then ISIL. But you know, Senator, I just want to make it clear as I go down that list and prioritize. You know, I don't view that meaning that we can attack those issues in sequence, or that a prioritization of one at the expense of the other is necessarily something we'd have to do at this particular time. All four of those security issues are ones that require the department to look at. They all create a challenge that needs to be addressed.
And that's why we live in very complicated times. I'd like to focus on our distributed laydown in the Pacific. And specific to Japan, I am aware of the concerns of the Okinawan population and their leadership. desire to halt construction of the Futenma replacement facility. And can you characterize the relationship and the challenges for relocating our forces from and within Japan? Because that is very much a part of the rebalance that we are committed to.
Senator, thanks. I recently did visit Japan. I was encouraged by my visit. I met with a number of their senior leaders, to include the Minister of Defense. I received nothing but their full commitment to continue with the Futenma replacement plan. And so my sense is that the Japanese government is committed to that. They recognize that that is important for us to continue with the preferred laydown that you alluded to. And so my sense right now is that our relationship with the Japanese and their stated commitment, we're in a pretty good place with regard to the Futenma replacement facility.
And do you view the Okinawa situation as mainly a concern that should be dealt with within Japan and their government?
Senator, we, and I specifically now talk about, the Marines in Okinawa, we need to be good neighbors and set the conditions for a positive relationship with the Okinawan people. So I think we can make a contribution. But at the end of the day, the issue of the Futenma replacement facility, from my perspective, is in fact an internal Japanese political issue that has to be worked by the Japanese government.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General Dunford, welcome to you and your family. As in your written testimony, you state, as Senator Fisher pointed out, that our nuclear deterrent is the nation's top military priority. And that leads me to a specific question related to how we plan for that priority over time. The health of our nation's whole nuclear weapons complex is critical to our nuclear deterrent. And one of the things you wrote in your written testimony is that we must recruit and train our next generation workforce capable of certifying stockpile requirements and to modernize the nuclear weapons infrastructure. Can you share with me your thoughts specifically on LDRD, or Laboratory Directed Research and Development, and the life extension programs that are going on at our national labs, and their role in achieving recruitment and retention of that next generation nuclear workforce?
Senator, that's an issue that in my current capacity, I frankly haven't developed any level of expertise, and I'd like to take that one for the record.
That would be fine. I look forward to engaging you on that in the future. I think it's going to be really important for us to view some of the particulars of how we manage the labs, and particularly the things that bring people into the pipeline at the front end with the greatest amount of expertise, and then they stay in those positions, rise up through the labs, and provide the continuity that it's going to take to make sure that we have the kind of modern deterrent that we need. I want to focus my next question on some of the challenges here at home. In my view, defense innovation is moving too slowly. Oftentimes in cycles that last years, while commercial innovation can be measured in cycles of months. This committee included a section in this year's NDAA to authorize funding, about half of which would be dedicated for directed energy, to accelerate the fielding of a variety of important offset technologies, including, in addition to directed energy, things like low-cost, high-speed munitions, cyber capabilities, autonomous systems, undersea warfare, and intelligence data analytics. What role do you think the development of these new technologies like directed energy and robotics will play in our national security posture? And what steps should we take to develop and deliver operationally useful systems more quickly?
Senator, in my capacity as the chairman, if I'm confirmed, I view the future of the joint force as being one of my critical responsibilities. And a key piece of that is making sure we keep a pace with innovation so that we not only get better at doing what we're doing today, but we find fundamentally different ways to do things in the future that are more effective, and they maintain our competitive advantage. And so I think what you're outlining is certainly an area of concern for me. Even as a service chief, I would tell you that over the past decade, our efforts at innovation probably were at a lower priority than they ought to be, and we've over the past year tried to energize that, and I would certainly bring that same focus and attention if I was confirmed as the chairman.
I appreciate that. One other challenge at home here is that the Air Force's remotely piloted aircraft career field is under really severe strain, largely through increased combatant commander requirements, insufficient personnel policy actions to improve manning levels, and just the basic reality that the Air Force is losing more remotely piloted aircraft pilots than it's training. We've heard from Secretary James and General Welsh. They've assured this committee that they're dedicated to resolving this shortfall, but I also want to get your commitment to helping resolve this issue. So if confirmed, I just ask that you make that a priority.
Senator, I just comment quickly that those men and women that are in that field represent a core capability in the Joint Force, and their effectiveness, their morale, their willingness to continue to serve is absolutely important, and I will certainly reinforce. I've spoken to General Welch about this particular issue, but I'll certainly reinforce the efforts of the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and the Secretary of the Air Force to make sure that those individuals are appreciated and that they have a climate within which they want to remain airmen.
I appreciate that deeply. I think it's an area where we are seeing some severe strains and where folks really need our support. So thank you.
Good morning, General Dunford. Thank you for your service and for your family's long time serving our nation. I leaned over to Senator Sullivan during some of your comments, and also thoroughly appreciate your concise answers to questions. It's refreshing to get that in the committee. I'd like to go back to a question, or build on a question that Senator Sessions asked of you, and it had to do with the plus-up of spending and the use of OCO as a way. Well, we all know that that is not the best way to do what you need to do, primarily for the purposes that you pointed out, the certainty. It still doesn't give you long-term certainty. But my question to you is, have you given thought to how you could potentially use this funding, although it's not a long-term commitment, to take the edge off of sequestration, and any ideas on precisely how you would?
Senator, we started to look at that, and it would really require a change in the rules for using OCO for us to be able to do that. Right now, if you applied, if you gave us OCO, given the current rules, we would not be able to use it in the places where we most need it. Much of the money that we requested in addition to the BCA level in the President's budget for 2016 was really focused on modernization. That's the thing that suffered the most over the last 2 years in addition to readiness. So we have looked at it, but there are some very practical limitations in our ability to apply OCO to some of the areas that we need it applied to.
Are you, will you be making specific recommendations for things that we need to look at to make sure that you get the most productivity you can out of it?
Senator, I will certainly do that through the Secretary of Defense as he works this issue.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to also questions that were asked about Afghanistan and Iraq. I visited both countries and spoke with a number of people while we were there, and it seems like in Afghanistan we've got the right mix. We've got them in the right roles, and the Afghanis have proven that they can fight successfully. In Iraq, I understand what you said about some of the political decisions of the past administration have caused a problem, and those structural issues have to be addressed. But have you given any thought to, assuming that you get to the point to where you have the right command infrastructure among the Iraqis, what we may need to actually create a credible, trained, effective fighting force for the Iraqis beyond the 3,000 currently present troops?
Senator, I can address that conceptually in terms of their ability to develop combined arms, in terms of their ability to develop institutional training, in terms of their ability to develop capacity at the ministerial level to support tactical level forces. But frankly, it's been a few years since I've been on the ground in Iraq, and what I'd like to do is take the opportunity, if I'm confirmed, to visit Iraq, talk to the commanders on the ground, and again, develop a comprehensive recommendation that would help us to move the campaign forward.
On the flip side, I know the Afghanis have made a lot of progress, but I think they still rely on us heavily for our train, advise, and assist role in our ISR capabilities in the region. I know that I've heard you say we can't have a calendar-based approach towards reduction in forces, but just the sense that I got when I was in Kabul was that those who are very much in touch with the situation on the ground now think that it would be a very bad idea to substantially reduce our current presence over the near term. Now, I assume that that's because they're looking ahead to 12 months, 18 months from now and saying we're still not going to be at a place where the Afghanis can be completely independent. Do you share that view?
Senator, what I can tell you is the assumptions that we made in a recommendation that was delivered in December of 2013, so it's now some 19 months ago, and some of the assumptions affected the timeline. And we certainly didn't expect it to be as much of a delay in the elections process of 2014 than there was, and that was a great distractor in our efforts to develop ministerial capacity. When I was on the ground, it was very difficult to get my counterparts to focus on some of the practical side of growing ministerial capacity when they were involved in a very real challenge of providing security for the elections. So it delayed our efforts in growing ministerial capacity. And there's been other areas where, we made some assumptions about things that could be done within a certain period of time that we actually didn't in the event get done during that window of time. So from a distance now, and again, another area where I would go over and talk to General Campbell and General Austin down at Central Command, if confirmed immediately, from a distance, it certainly makes sense to me that the timeline that we originally identified in 2013 as being possible has probably been affected by the political events inside of Afghanistan and other events associated with the enemy.
Thank you, General Dunford. I look forward to supporting your confirmation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your service, General, and thank you to your family who are here today for their service as well. I want to begin with what you assessed as the primary threats from Russia and China and talk about a weapons platform or system that has not been raised today, our submarine force. I recognize that it's not immediately part of your background, but obviously a grave responsibility if you are confirmed, and I certainly am going to strongly support your confirmation as the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Ohio replacement program is critical to our nuclear deterrence, and the cost of that program has been estimated in the range of $100 billion. The Navy has said that it cannot pay for it out of its Navy budget. I'm wondering whether you will consider and whether you will support looking at the Defense Department budget as a whole to fund the Ohio replacement program, which I'm assuming you agree is critical to our nuclear deterrence.
Senator, thanks. First, I do agree it's critical. It's the most survivable part of the triad and a critical capability for us to modernize. I am very familiar with the budgetary implications of the Ohio-class replacement on the Department of the Navy's long-range shipbuilding plan. And what I can tell you with a degree of surety is that were we to fund the Ohio-class replacement out of the Department of the Navy, it would have a pretty adverse effect on the rest of the shipbuilding plan, and the estimates are somewhere between 2.5 and 3 ships a year. And again, we're not anywhere near where we need to be right now, and so the 30-year shipbuilding plan was intended to get us where we need to be. So I do think a broader mechanism for the Ohio-class replacement makes sense. Otherwise, we're going to have some pretty adverse effects on the Navy. And as I've mentioned a couple of times in testimony today, one of my perspectives coming into this role would be, if confirmed, is that we need to have some balance, and that includes a balanced Navy. So as important as the Ohio-class replacement is, the United States Navy, in terms of the forward presence they provide, in terms of their warfighting capability, has many other capabilities that are critical to our nation as well. And it'd be difficult to balance those were the Ohio-class replacement to be paid for within the current Department of Navy's projected resources.
Thank you for that answer, General. I'm hoping that you would agree with equal surety that the continuing program to build 2 subs a year, 2 Virginia-class subs a year, should continue as planned right now.
Senator, and here's where I defer to my partner, Chief of Naval Operations, but that's certainly his plan, and I trust his judgment in that regard.
Thank you. Going to another area that I don't think has been raised yet, I know of your very passionate and admirable commitment to the men and women who are our greatest asset in the United States Armed Forces, their well-being and their welfare. And I hope that you can commit that you will continue the effort to coordinate better with the Veterans Administration for men and women who are leaving active duty on everything from transfer of medical records to drug formularies to a range of issues. I don't need to expound on them for you, but I hope that you will focus and continue those efforts.
Senator, absolutely, and just so you know, I view, keeping faith with our men and women in uniform as one of the primary responsibilities of leadership, and that's both when they're in uniform and when they're out of uniform. And we have an expression, certainly in the Marine Corps that, once a Marine, always a Marine, and from my perspective, once you've served our country, the service and support that you should get in return as part of that bargain that we make with young men and women who enlist is something that's pretty sacred. And I absolutely will continue to support the efforts to make sure that the health care transition that our young men and women make when they're in uniform to the Veterans Administration is as seamless as possible. I think we owe them that.
One last question, General. Your predecessor, General Dempsey, has stated repeatedly, and I'm quoting, "We have the capability to use a military option if the Iranians choose to stray off the diplomatic path," end quote. My question to you is, are you satisfied that our nation has done enough to prepare militarily for the option, and the President has said that all options should be on the table, if necessary, to use a military option there, as much as we all may wish that the negotiations should succeed?
Senator, my understanding today is that we have both the plans in place and the capability in place to deal with a wide range of eventualities in Iran.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Dunford, congratulations on your nomination, and thank you for your 38 years of distinguished service and your leadership as Commandant of the Marine Corps. Our nation is fortunate to have a military leader such as you serving at a time of great peril. I want to ask a question of you that is the same question I asked your predecessor, General Dempsey. If the objective were to destroy ISIS, not to weaken them, not to degrade them, but to utterly destroy them within 90 days, what would be required militarily to accomplish that objective?
Senator, my assessment is that it would not be possible to destroy ISIL within 90 days, and I also don't believe that we can develop an enduring solution simply with military force against ISIL, although I do think the military aspect of the campaign is critical.
Well, if the time frame I've suggested is not feasible, let me ask you a follow-up question, which is what would be required to destroy ISIS and what time frame is necessary? Specifically, if that were the objective, what would be required to accomplish it militarily?
Yes, Senator, if I'm confirmed, I'll continue to look at this issue, but my perspective today is that this is a long-term endeavor. This is on the order of years, not months, in order to defeat, destroy, in your words, ISIL.
And what would be required to do that in whatever time period is necessary?
Yeah, from a military perspective, Senator, the two things that we're doing, I think we need to continue to do, and that is to take action to deny ISIL sanctuary wherever it may take root, both in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere. It will require us to build local forces, build partnership capacity, if you will, of the local forces that would be the real defeat mechanism for ISIL in the respective countries, given the way that it's spread right now. You'd have to have effective governance so that you had the conditions set for long-term stability where ISIS could not then get traction again in the future. We'd have to address the foreign financing of ISIS, where they get their money, as well as their economic assets within each one of those countries. We'd have to address the movement of foreign fighters back and forth. And probably as importantly, the one thing we need to do, Senator, is we need to undermine the narrative of ISIL and discredit the narrative of ISIL.
In your personal judgment, are you concerned about the rules of engagement for our current use of air power, that it is overly constraining the effectiveness?
Senator, I'm not. And one of the reasons is that when we go to war with our values, and we conduct proportionality in the planning and discrimination and execution. And the thing that we're doing now is ensuring that we don't have civilian casualties. And I think that, frankly, supports our narrative and gives us the credibility we need to be successful long-term in this campaign.
In recent days, the administration has informed Congress that we are arming the Kurds. This is something I have called for a long time. I spoke this week with a senior Kurdish leader who reported that the commanders on the ground of the Peshmerga are not confirming that. What can you tell this committee about the extent to which we are providing serious arms to the Kurds and it's actually getting to them rather than being bogged down in Baghdad?
Senator, first, I would agree with you. The most effective ground forces, both in Syria and Iraq today, are in fact the Kurds. My understanding is that the issues associated with supporting the Kurds have been addressed, and they are now getting the support, the material support that they need, as well as the training that they need. And if I'm confirmed, I'll certainly, as a matter of priority, go over there, visit, and make sure that I'm able to make my own personal assessment, based on the facts on the ground.
Will you commit to providing this committee with specific details in terms of what is being done to arm the Kurds?
I will do that, Senator.
Let me ask concerning Iran. If Iran were to acquire nuclear weapons, what is the national security risk, in your judgment, to the United States of that occurrence?
Senator, I think it's significant, particularly if accompanying that is intercontinental ballistic missile technology. It's a significant threat to our nation. It's also a destabilizing effort in the destabilizing action in the Middle East, and I think we can expect a proliferation of nuclear arms as a result of Iranian possession of nuclear weapons.
So, General, my final question, I'm concerned about morale in the military. We've discussed in this hearing how the world is getting more and more dangerous, and yet at the same time I think we are dramatically undermining our readiness, our ability to defend this nation. The Military Times did a survey where in 2009 they asked soldiers whether overall the quality of life is good or excellent. 91% said yes. In 2014, that number had dropped from 91% to 56%. Likewise, they asked whether the senior military leadership has my best interest at heart. In 2009, 53% agreed. In 2014, that had dropped in half to roughly 27%. Do you share the concerns about declining morale in the military? And if so, what do you see as the causes of it and the proper approach to fix it?
No, Senator, thanks for the question. First of all, with regard to the morale of our force, it's clearly one of the things that distinguishes us, and I was able to say in my own opening statement that we have the most capable military force in the world today, and that clearly is rooted in the men and women that we have in uniform and their willingness to do what we've asked them to do over the last decade, and it's not something I'd be complacent about. I do have concerns as a service chief about how hard we've been running our men and women over the last few years. As an example, Senator, we had a plan where we wanted to have a 1 to 3 deployment to dwell ratio. That means our forces would be deployed about 7 months, home for 21 months. That allowed us to get adequate training, allowed us to take care of the families, allowed the Marines to kind of be at what I describe as the sustained rate of fire. Many of our units now inside the Marine Corps are at or below a 1 to 2 deployment to dwell rate, so they're home for less than twice as much time. So they'll be deployed for 7 months, home less than 14 months, and back out again, and that continues on, and certainly has an effect on the families and again, our ability to train across the range of military operations. If I'm confirmed, Senator, this is absolutely going to be one of the areas that I focus on. I think I have a responsibility to lead the young men and women in uniform. I think I have a responsibility to represent them. And when I say represent them, that means to articulate to our leadership, both here on the Hill as well as in the executive branch, what material support, what leadership, what resources they need to remain the finest fighting force, in the United States. And it bothers me greatly if our young men and women don't have confidence in their senior leadership. And I can tell you that every day when I wake up, if I'm confirmed, that'll be an issue of priority for me, that'll be exactly what I seek to do, is gain the trust and confidence of our young men and women and let them know that they are, in fact, properly represented back here in Washington, D.C., and that we as leaders recognize that we're asking them to do a lot, and they don't ask much more in return than to have the wherewithal to accomplish the mission with minimal loss of life or equipment. And I'll commit to you that that's exactly what I'll do.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hasn't sequestration bred uncertainty which has contributed to this drop in morale?
Chairman, thanks. I should have mentioned that when I talked about how busy the forces are. There is a tremendous amount of angst across the force, and a large part of that is driven by the uncertainty about how big the force will be, what will happen to their particular careers, and will we have the equipment necessary to accomplish the mission. So I do think, Chairman, that sequestration is a factor.
Senator Sullivan had one follow-up question, and then return to Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General, I just want to get back to the issue of the military's role in relationship with Congress. Do you think it's an important role that we have to make sure that our services don't replicate missions and core competencies, particularly in an austere budget environment like we have right now?
I do, Senator.
So let me just provide a quick example. I believe one of the core competencies that the Army has is large-scale airborne units that can deploy on a moment's notice anywhere in the world. Do you think that's one of their core competencies?
I do, Senator.
A few months ago, a military general testified in front of one of the subcommittees here about putting troops and helicopters on naval shipping for, quote, expeditionary maneuver throughout the Pacific. What services core competency would you associate that mission with?
I would associate that with the United States Marine Corps, Senator.
So if I told you that was an Army general describing the Army's new Pacific Pathways strategy, would that surprise you?
It would not, Senator. I've seen that description in the open source.
You think that costly new Army mission is a redundant mission to the United States Marine Corps mission? And
Senator,
is that a good use of America's taxpayer and military spending?
Yes, Senator, given the shortfall of amphibious lift, I'm speaking now as a service chief, I think the priority ought to go to the United States Marine Corps.
And would it be an appropriate role of this Congress to try to limit such redundancies by making sure military funding goes to core competencies like much-needed Army airborne brigades in the Asia-Pacific and the Arctic, as opposed to redundant activities like troops and Army helicopters on naval shipping?
Senator, I do agree that the Congress has a critical role in ensuring that we have a proper division of labor within the Department of Defense and that the joint capabilities and capacities that we have are right-sized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that single follow-up question. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for getting back so late. I was at an appropriations markup. But General Dunford, thank you very much to you and your family for your service in the past and for your willingness to continue to serve. And I have to say, after watching you before the crowd of New Hampshire business folks and hearing from them how impressed they were, I look forward to the impression that you're going to make as the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So I wanted to follow up on Senator Wicker's questions about Europe and the concerns in Europe, because I recently returned from a visit to Poland and to Latvia, where I saw the NATO exercises in Latvia at a DASI base, and heard extreme concern about the potential for Putin to engage, as you pointed out, in asymmetric instigation in the Baltics and in other Eastern European countries. And am concerned about the failure to date of Europe to commit to the 2% of their GDP for defense spending, and wonder if you have thoughts about what more we might be able to do to encourage them to ante up.
Senator, I do think it's important that our NATO partners bear their share of the burden. That's an issue that I know Secretary Carter and his predecessors all addressed. They came out of the Wales Conference with a commitment for all those nations to meet that 2%. From my perspective, given the shortfall of capabilities and capacities in Europe in areas like intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, defensive cyber capabilities, strategic lift, and so forth, I think it's going to be absolutely critical for our partners to develop those capabilities and capacities. I'd also add that I've seen firsthand in my previous assignment in Afghanistan, when our NATO partners are properly resourced, they do have capabilities and capacities that can be integrated to great effect. And so I do think the alliance, were to be properly resourced, can be a very effective force for stability on the in Europe as well as for out-of-Europe operations.
I agree, and hopefully we will see that commitment followed through on, because clearly the threat from Putin and from Russia continues, and our Eastern European allies are very concerned about that. I want to ask you about, you talked about the deployment pressures on our military. I wonder if you could give me your perspective on the appropriate active to reserve ratio and the importance of the National Guard and Reserve in continuing the military mission that we have in this country.
Senator, I can, and of course, one of the things we have to do when we talk about using the reserve and the Guard is balance the concerns of employers, concerns of families, with the willingness and the desire, frankly, for the Guard and Reserve to continue to serve in what's more of a operational, a strategic sense. And what I mean by that is there was in the past a sense that the Guard and Reserve would be something, in the case of a major war, we would mobilize the Guard and Reserve. I think we found today, particularly with the size of our U.S. military force and our commitments, that the Guard and Reserve is much more operational in that they're useful and necessary on a day-to-day basis. My sense is, as a service chief, and I'll certainly look at the implications across the other services if I'm confirmed, is about once every 4 years is a reasonable time for a major deployment. Although in many cases, depending on what their employment is and so forth, individuals can be available on a much more routine basis. But for whole units, probably about 1 to 4 years, 1 year deployment, mobilization, and then 4 years back focused on their families and employers seems to be sustainable. But again, if I'm confirmed, I'll certainly consult with the appropriate leadership in the Guard and Reserve to make sure that I have a full appreciation for their challenges, as well as the other service chiefs.
Well, thank you. We've seen in New Hampshire the significant contribution of the Guard and the integration, particularly with the air refueling of active duty and Guard in providing that mission. So I think it's very important. Let me ask you if you would commit to two things. One is in 2013, the department announced the elimination of the direct combat exclusion policy and announced plans to fully integrate more women into all occupational fields. I hope that you will continue that effort and see it through. As we know, women are making up a greater percentage of our military these days, and making sure that they have the ability to compete in all areas, I think, is significant. The other question, I noticed this week that the Navy announced that they have tripled the maternity leave policy for women serving in the Navy, and I would urge you to consider that across all branches of the military. Again, as women are making up more of our troops, I think it's important to address the issues that, the family issues that they have, and certainly maternity leave is a big part of that. So I hope you will do that.
Thank you, Senator. I'll look at both of those issues.
Thank you.
Senator Graham.
Thank you. Mr. General, I think you're an outstanding choice. The President could not have chosen a better person to be Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So congratulations to you and your family for a lot of great service. The best is yet to come. When it comes to stopping ISIL, that's the stated goal, is to degrade and destroy. What if we fail in that goal? What can America expect?
Senator, if we were to fail in stopping ISIL, I think you'll see an expansion of ISIL not only across the Middle East, but outside the Middle East. And we've obviously seen now elements of ISIL in the Maghreb all the way over to Afghanistan.
So they're an expanding power as we speak?
They're Senator, I think they're expanded in terms of geographic location. I've not yet concluded that they're expanded in terms of capability.
Gotcha. But I remember when we were talking in the office, you said if we don't stop these guys, we can expect a tsunami of ISIL and their sympathizers. Is that fair?
Senator, I think it is fair. That's exactly what I said, and I stand by that comment.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, I don't want this tsunami to come, so we're going to have to stop these guys. Is it fair to say that Iraq and Syria need to be looked at, need to be viewed as one battle space when it comes to ISIL? It'd be hard to stop them in Iraq if you don't address their presence in Syria.
Absolutely, Senator. The enemy doesn't respect the boundaries that we see on the map.
Can you envision a scenario where you have a regional army made up of Arabs and maybe Turkey that would go into Syria and fight ISIL alone, leaving Assad off the table? Would they join up for such a fight?
Senator, it's hard for me watching the politics from the outside right now to see that degree of integration given the divergent interests that those countries have. But I can certainly see where that would be an effective way to deal with this, is to have a regional army that would be willing to deal with ISIL.
Right, but my question is, if you did not put Assad's removal on the table, it would be hard to get them to join up just to fight ISIL because they're worried about Syria becoming a puppet of Iran?
That's right, Senator. Most of the countries that you spoke about all have a shared goal of removing Assad from power.
Would you agree with me that Assad's presence is sort of a magnet for Sunni extremists?
I think if not the proximate cause of the ISIL movement, certainly one of the primary drivers of the ISIL movement was the abuses of the Assad regime.
If we go down to 1,000 Kabul-centric U.S. forces in 2017 in Afghanistan, do we substantially lose our counterterrorism mission?
My assessment is we'd have a significant degradation of our counterterrorism mission in Afghanistan if we were to do that.
Would we lose our eyes and ears along the Afghan-Pakistan border that we enjoy today?
We would, Senator.
Okay. Would, in your view, that would create a lot of risk to the gains we've achieved over the last decade if we did not have those eyes and ears in counterterrorism forces?
Senator, there's no question it would create risk.
Okay, when it comes to 60 Free Syrian Army troops being trained under the current regime, would you agree with me this is going to be very hard to recruit people to go into Syria if you don't promise them protection from Assad, because if they get any capability at all in fighting ISIL, Assad would assume that capability would be turned on him one day, and he's not going to sit on the sidelines and watch a force mature and develop without hitting them. Does that make sense to you?
I agree with that assessment, Senator.
So the most logical consequence of training a force to go in Syria to fight ISIL alone is that Assad will see them as a threat to his regime and most likely attack.
I agree with that, Senator.
And it would be very, I think, immoral to put someone in that position knowing that's coming their way without some capability to defend themselves. Does that make sense to you?
Senator, my assessment is that if we train moderate Syrian forces, a new Syrian army, then we ought to also provide them with the wherewithal to be successful.
If this war in Syria continues the way it is going for another year, do you worry about stability in Jordan?
I do, Senator.
Do you worry about stability in Lebanon?
I do, Senator.
So the consequences of going into Syria with a regional force and all the problems associated with it have to be balanced against the consequences of ISIL surviving and thriving.
I agree with that, Senator.
In your view, over the long haul, is it in America's national security interest to do things necessary to degrade and destroy ISIL?
I do believe that's absolutely in our national interest to do that, Senator.
Do you agree with me that whatever regional army we may form, there's certain American capabilities that would be outcome determinative in any fight against ISIL, and it would be in our national security interest to provide those capabilities?
Particularly, Senator, I agree with that, Senator, particularly in the case of aviation, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and probably special operations capabilities.
Finally, if a soldier or a member of our military falls in Iraq or Syria trying to destroy ISIL, would you agree with me that they died protecting their homeland?
I would, Senator.
And that's the reason some of them may have to go back.
Senator, there's no question in my mind that the young men and women that we have deployed right now, the 3,500 that are inside of Iraq and those that are in the surrounds working for the CENTCOM in this campaign, are protecting our nation.
God bless them. God bless you. Best of luck.
Thank you, Senator.
General, on behalf of Chairman McCain, let me thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your service and the service to your family. And also, on behalf of the Chairman, I will now adjourn the hearing.
Thank you, Senator Reed.